Hey, Dr. C here. Nice to see you again. Warming up finally. I love it. I love it. Okay, today, however, we're going to talk about how to be an executor. Now, I know I'm talking to an older audience, and a lot of you have been executors before. So I want you to understand that being an executor is not a simple task. It is a prolonged task. It is not an easy task. And so my hope is that a talk to you will stimulate you to go and talk to whoever is your executor. They're the ones who should understand and learn all of these things on how to be an executor. And so, use this information. I would be very happy to give a talk, as a matter of fact, on being an executor. And in fact, I'm going to do so over at the Shrewsbury Council on Aging on the 10th of August. So give the Council on Aging a call, set up your reserved seat, learn about how to be an executor, and if you can, try to get your executor to be there, your caretaker, whatever. Okay? Let's go on. This is in continuity now with the three-part series that I gave on end-of-life issues. Obviously, it ended with the end of life. And so we're going to start from that. The last thing I talked about with the end of life was the molst form, the life form. That is the end of life form. That is the home DNR form. So there's a DNR form at the hospital, and there's a molst form at the home. Now the molst form is a bright pink color, so that when an EMT comes into your house, for example, they see that pink form, and if it is properly signed and all, they will follow the instructions that you gave on that form. The form itself is basically do not resuscitate or resuscitate. Full response or maybe partial. Don't intubate, something like that. On the rear part of the molst form are things that would be pertinent to should you want dialysis or not? Do you want IV therapy or not? So those are the simple things, but major things at the end of life. And so I have a molst form myself. My wife has a molst form, but they are not signed. Not signed. And the reason they're not signed is because I'm not so sure that if the EMTs come into my house, if I have something that is resuscitatable. Maybe I'll get over this. I don't know at this point in time if that's the case, but nevertheless, I did not sign that form. So that's the time to sign it when you know this is truly at the end of life. Okay, so that was the last thing we discussed as part of our end of life series, and so now we're going to go from there. We're going to start out with what is death. Now, believe it or not, there's still argument about what is death. Is it when all of your systems no longer function? Or is it when the brain no longer functions? Is their brain dead? There's still a lot of argument about that. And these little tests that they can do to test whether you have brain death or not. There's still argument about that as well. And a lot of the regulations on brain death vary from state to state, believe it or not. So I'm not going to get into a lot of these ethical issues, however, with this particular thing. So nevertheless, you're dead. You're ready to get planted. Okay. What do you do? What do you do at that point in time? Well, normally what people will do is they'll call the funeral director. And a lot of people do plan ahead, and they have a funeral director that they give a call to. Well, the funeral director can't move that body unless they get a certificate of death. And so this is the certificate. I've signed many of those certificates as a physician in the past. Now, you don't have to be a physician. You could be a nurse practitioner. You could be a physician's assistant. But they need to be signed. And as part of that certificate of death, not only do they have the demographics on there, but they have the immediate cause and contributing causes of the death. And then it's signed. So that has to be accurately filled out. Accurately filled out. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a funeral director to do this. In fact, you don't even have to have a funeral director to have a funeral. You can still do it yourself. Obviously, it'd be a lot cheaper to do it yourself, but you have to know all of the different parameters that you have to do as an executor. You have to know all those things ahead of time. So we have that form then signed out, death certificate, and we're going to assume we have a funeral director, and now they can move the body to wherever, to probably wherever their building is, okay? So what's the very first thing that you have to do as an executor? Well, you can go through these things, and I did. I went through a lot of these different things, and it depends on who writes up the list of things you have to do as an executor. If you're a lawyer, you may not even understand half of the damn things that they put down that you got to do. If you are, let's say, a politician and all, they have a list. If you're a funeral director, they have a list. Everybody has their own little list of things that the executor has to do. The very first thing that you need to do as an executor is to find out if the deceased person is an organ donor or not. Now, why is that so imminent? Why is that so important that you do that first? Well, let's face it. How long can organs live with no circulation, no oxygen going into their system? Well, it varies with the organ, but the one that can live the longest is the kidney. But the kidney, this is under ideal circumstances. That can live up to 36 hours under ideal circumstances, but not ideal. In other words, the temperature is not right, it's too warm. All these different things affect how long that kidney will be good as a donor. So you only have, say, 24 hours. Otherwise, after that, the only thing you can donate would be your cornea and maybe some bone, and that's it. That's it. You cannot be a donor after that length of time. And so, that is so important. It's also important if you are, say you had a bad brain injury and your brain dead. Now, basically, what I said on my MOLS form, if I'm brain dead, I want to be a donor, so it's okay to keep me alive, my heart alive at least, with intravenous fluids and intubation if you have to. Okay, that's what I said. I don't know what you're going to say. It's up to you. It's up to you. So, at any rate, if you are a donor, you immediately, you got to call the New England Donor Center. That's the very first thing that you do. The donor service, the number of donor service is a 1-800 number, 446-6362. You give them a call. They will take care of everything from that point on. Okay, and that is all of New England, all of New England. So that is donor donation. Okay, then the next thing you need to do, you need to secure the property. Now that is not simple. That is very, very important because, believe it or not, I read the obituaries every day, and there are some seedy individuals who will read that obituary every day, and if they see that someone has died, they find out their address and that property will be at risk, at risk. Now, there are other things having to do with the property. You got to maintain that property. So you got to secure the property first, and you have to maintain that property during the period of time you're the executor. Okay? Now, are there any pets? Let's face it, a lot of the seniors have pets. So make sure that the pet or pets are basically taken care of too. So, okay, that all falls under that next thing, that secure the property. Okay, that's number 2. What's number 3? Okay, number 3 is you got to get your team together. It's not something an individual should take on only themselves. There are probably other members of the family or close friends who will help you, especially if you have somebody who has a little more knowledge of financial issues, legal issues, all of these things. That's going to be part of your team to get you through all this. Okay, so that is number 3, get your team. Number 4, you need to have your documents. You're going to start a little folder then, purely an estate folder. And everything that you do will go into that folder for reference during the time that you are the executor until you finally discharge that responsibility. And so that's number 3. Number 4 was getting that folder started. Okay, what else do you need to do? Well, now you got to deal with not just your own grief. And can you imagine, here you are, a close relative or maybe a spouse has just died, you're an executor, you're going through the immediate grief process. And it's shock, it's a shock. And here you are, you're in grief, and you have to do certain things very quickly, very quickly. And it's usually, you know, a nice, pleasant funeral director who's kind of guiding you through it and all. But nevertheless, you've got to make these decisions very quickly. So, what sort of decisions? Well, simple things, simple things. Do you want a wake? Do you want a funeral? Where are these things going to be? Next thing you have to do, if you're going to have a funeral, well, you got to pick out the music. You got to order the flowers. You got to get all of the damn pictures together of the deceased to kind of highlight that person's life and all. So, and those are the simple things. You got to decide who's going to be the pallbearers. You got to decide who's going to do the eulogy. All these things you need to decide, and it's up to you, the executor, and the executor's team, what is going to happen with all of these different things. Now, have you got a plot? Well, I have a plot. I got a 4-person plot. But nevertheless, do you have a plot? If not, you got to get a plot. Where are you going to get planted? So you got to get that plot pretty quickly. Now, in order to do it, you got to get a damn burial permit. You can't even be buried without a frickin' permit in this state. So you got to get a burial permit, okay? You head over to the town hall, you get yourself a burial permit, you get yourself a plot. Now, what else do you have to do? Well, fortunately, right now, that's all you have to do. Now the funeral director will take over and will arrange for the transportation. We'll arrange to have you pick out a casket. And of course, there's all sorts of different caskets that you can put a pine box all the way up to a very fancy metal casket. They are all sorts of wooden caskets, all polished, of course, beautiful caskets. And then they just throw dirt over it anyway. But nevertheless, they got all these caskets, and they usually cost $2,000 to $3,000, these wooden caskets. They're not cheap, not cheap. So what is the next thing you need to do? Well, the next thing you need to do, you got to locate the will. Locate the will. and locate any of the other essential documents that deceased has left. Now, what are the essential documents? Well, there's the will. Do they have a power of attorney? Now, the power of attorney, remember, is just for financial and other associated financial issues. But then do you have a medical power of attorney? Do you have an advance directive? Do you have a revocable trust? All those things should be put together, hopefully by the deceased or the deceased family ahead of time. But many times it's not. And so you got to go all over the place to try to find out all these different legal documents. Now, I personally have a revocable trust as well as a will. Why do I have a revocable trust? In order to avoid probate. We need to try to avoid probate at all costs. Why? Why? Number one, probate is not cheap. 5 to 10% of the estate monies and all will go into probate. Number two, it takes 1 to 2 years to go through probate. Time is important. Number three, it is a public record. Anybody can get it. Anybody can learn about all of the different things that are in your records. So, for those three reasons alone, I wanted to avoid probate. Okay, so at any rate, you've got to find these documents. Now, in order to find those documents, you also need some smaller, well, not smaller, but lesser important documents. You need to know your birth certificate. You need to know and find your marriage certificate if you are married. You need to find out also your Social Security card. All these things are important. Your driver's license. All these things that you normally will carry in your wallet or you put in your safety deposit box at home. One or the other. You need all those things. You need all your old credit cards. Why? Because they all got to get canceled, for God's sakes. Because they're in your name. So they have to be canceled. The driver's license has to be canceled. So all these things are all important things as part of document gathering that the executor has to do after the funeral. This is right after the funeral. Don't let the funeral screw up your grief process. You need to go through your grieving too. Obviously, it does interfere with it. Can't avoid it. But nevertheless, you start then after the funeral gathering all these documents. Now, that may take a while. So, once you get the will and the revocable trust and the advance directive, etc., all these things, you got to read them. So, the will hopefully point out who all of the beneficiaries are of all of your estate. And remember, the estate is a federal definition of the estate that we use in Massachusetts, which includes everything, anything that your name is on. I don't care if you and your wife's name is on it, you and a child's name is on it, anything that has your name that could potentially give any kind of income to the government, they are after it. That is part of your estate. So the estate, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk on our end-of-life issues, what your estate is, basically. And why? Because the estate tax, and boy, we got a whole section on taxes, which you're going to have to deal with too as an executor. Taxes. Now, federal tax, there is a federal estate tax, but it's now $11 million. And, let's face it, most of us don't have $11 million. So forget the federal. But the state of Massachusetts, $1 million estate tax. $1 million, you're exempt for the first million, and then from that point on, you have to pay estate tax. Now, I know the government the governor in our state now is trying to raise that, but I don't think she's pushing that hard. And I don't think a lot of the legislators are pushing to have that estate tax up from $1 million. Now, Massachusetts has the worst estate tax regulations in the whole damn country. The worst. $1 million. Nowadays, with your real estate, your house is probably worth a good chunk of that $1 million already. So it doesn't take long to hit that $1 million estate. And once it hits $1.1 million, you're taxed on the whole thing, $1.1 million. If you're $999,000, you're safe. But $1.1 million, you're dead. That's it. So lousy, lousy estate tax. But we'll deal with that a little bit later. Okay, so you're going to read the will, read your revocable trust. Fortunately, with the revocable trust, you avoid probate. Now, what if you don't have a revocable trust? What if you just have a will? Okay, now you got to go to probate. And how long do you have to go to probate? You got 3 months that you have in order to file for probate. Now, what do you mean file? Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. File for probate. And so, what do you need to file for probate? Well, I got a list of what you need to file. So, in order to send that petition in for probate, obviously, anything you send in that has a form also has a cost. So the cost of filing for probate, $375 plus a surcharge tax of $15, plus another $15 in order for you to be able to put your little identification in the paper so that if there are any people who you still owe money to, if you file it in the paper, they should be able to see it. You should read those, actually. It's a section at the end, small print, but still, you got to watch that small print, remember. So you file for your probate. What else do you need? Well, you also need documents. You need to have a document that says who the spouse and the children and all of the beneficiaries are. That's required. You also need the original will, which you need to file with that. You need a certified copy of the death certificate, which you can get at the town hall. The town clerk has all of the death certificates there. And you also have to file what's called a citation, which is a document that you get when you file for probate and all. You get that citation, basically. You also need what they call a decree and order on petition. It's also a form 755. Occasionally, you have to file a bond with that as well. Any military affidavit that you have. So I have a DD 214 saying that I have I've been discharged from the Navy, so I have to have that file as well. So you need all those documents just to file for probate. And then the clerk of probate will put it on the docket, who knows when, and will issue that citation, though, right away, so you can get that in the paper. Okay, so that is the first thing that we do. Now, what else? Well, what else is Social Security card? Well, Social Security card, why do you need that? Well, because whoever the spouse is or children of that deceased person, you can still get benefits. But you have to let the Social Security office know of the death. You have to file another death certificate with them, and you have to expect and you have to know that you can get these benefits. A spouse should be able to get 100% of what that spouse's benefits were. So that is important. Plus you do get a nominal amount of money too. But that, $200-300 But nevertheless, hey, $200-300 in the estate's pocket. Let's face it. Okay. What is the next thing you need? Well, you also need to have all your property titles, title to property if you own a house, whatever. You need to know all of the mortgages, so you need to know who the mortgage is being held by, which bank or whatever is holding that mortgage. Any rentals that you have, you got to know who the people are. You need to have the insurance policies. Now, there may be, as you know, there's two different types of insurance. You can have the long-term insurance, term insurance, which is a lot cheaper, or you can have whole life insurance. Now, that whole life insurance policy also has a value to it, because that insurance policy has been paid on an annual basis with premiums, etc., and that builds up a cash value. That cash value adds to the sum on that life insurance policy. You need to have the policies and then find out exactly how much the added amount of cash value is, and that is the value you should get back on those policies. So you also need to file with them the death certificate as well, and you need to file for getting back that money. You also need to get your bank. Now, you need to go to the bank for two reasons. Number one, you need to let the bank know that this person who has an account there has been deceased now. But also, you need to file and get a specific bank account for the estate, an estate bank account. Okay? So now you have an estate bank account, but in order to do it, you have to have an employer identification number, an EIN number, because now that estate is like a person. And so you have to have that employer identification number in order to get an estate to file for that bank account. Okay, so now you got your bank account all set up. You're still paying the mortgage on a monthly basis or whatever you have to do. You filed. Now you got to contact the credit card companies. Let them know you're past, you're gone. And so, now you have an estate bank account that will pay any lingering, ongoing type of charges that are going on to that account. Okay. You need to contact the Department of Transportation and say, okay, this guy has a driver's license. He's now deceased. Okay. Now, what are you going to do with all of these email or website accounts that you have? Now, some people have a lot of accounts. They have their bank account. They're paying all their bills through that. And each one of those has a password and all. And you've got to be aware of that. Now, you need to find out, first of all, what all these things are, all of these different accounts that a person may have had online. Now, I have an individual, not the executor, but an individual, a son, who is a computer analyst, so he is the one who's dealing with mine. I was lucky. I had also a son who's a financial person. He's going to take care of the financial issues. Like I said, you need a team to deal with all these nonsense things. Okay, those are the absolute important things. Now, what else? Well, you have health insurance. You have health insurance. In fact, you have a lot of different insurances. You have insurance on your house, you have insurance on your property, or insurance on the car. All these have to be notified and dealt with as well. Okay, now what about the Medicare and Medicaid? Okay, all of the people my age now all have Medicare. Now, they may have Medicare Advantage plans, may have other plans as well, but at any rate, you have to notify both Medicare and the specific Advantage plan, if that's what you have as well. You need to let them know that that person has passed away. Okay, so let's deal now with that probate court. That's still in limbo. Let's face it, still in limbo. Well, what the heck? What are you going to do with that? Because not only do you have to file an income tax for the estate and a state tax as well with the state, but you also have to file a tax being a beneficiary. Whoa. Oh my God. Now what do you have to do? Well, there is a form for filing as an individual. It's called a K-1 form. And in fact, there's 3 different K-1 forms, but you want the K-1 form that's very specifically for people who have an estate tax possible liability. So, and this is good for the state as well as federally. Now, our state does not have an inheritance tax. Thank God, probably the only damn thing we don't have a tax on in this state. But nevertheless, you file that K-1 form federally and state. Okay, so that is a form for every beneficiary. Every beneficiary. Why? Because what you have to do is you list not only the beneficiary's name and address, but also you have to do an assessment of the entire estate in order to come up with a number. You got to come up with a number. Now, I've been around for a long time. I've been in Shrewsbury since 1973. We've built up a whole bunch of different things in our house. All of it will be property that is part of my estate. Now, some of it may be collections, some of it may be antique, some of all different things that add up, Now, how do you get an assessment of all of these private properties? You may have to get and hire someone who does assessing of all of these different types of things. Now, one person cannot be an expert at assessing, say, a stamp collection, a coin collection, antiques. They're not experts in every field. So what you have to do is you go to one person who has a general assessment background, and they know the people who can give you an accurate assessment of all the different special collections that you may have. And so it has to be assessed. It has to be. And all that is going to go into that K-1 form so that the government can look and see, well, how much did you get from this? Oh, you're going to have to pay a bit of tax on that. They get you every way you can. So that is another thing on your plate, basically, as an executor. So what else? What else? Oh, God, isn't that a huge number of things that you have to do? Finally, you need to pay all the debts. So the debts, like I said, you file that sheet. It's called the citation. You put that into the paper, and you get. I think you get about 3 months, something like that. And then basically, if nobody answers it, or if only a few people answer, you pay off the debts. And then pay off the taxes. You have to file your taxes too. File for the state, file for the federal government, and you're going to use the estate tax number, to file those. Okay. So the individual beneficiaries, they'll get their K-1s as well, and then they have to file federally, because there's no inheritance tax in Massachusetts, but they have to file federally in order to satisfy that requirement. Okay. So you paid off the debts, you paid off your taxes, and then finally, all of the assets are together, and how many beneficiaries do you have? You divide it all up according to whatever the will said, or the revocable trust says. You file it, you give out exactly the way the deceased person wanted. So, okay. Now, if there are some specialty things that the deceased wanted to go to a particular beneficiary, you take care of that. You take care of that. That's where a lot of the arguments come in. A lot of the arguments come in. There's always a dispute. Like, I got 10 kids. Can you imagine the disputes that are going to occur with 10 kids? Most people don't have that many kids. And there's still disputes. 1 or 2 kids. As long as you have 2 kids, there's going to be a dispute. 1 kid, you're safe. 1 kid, you're safe. But 2 kids, you're dead. You gotta argue these things out sometimes. So, okay. Now we're dividing up on the beneficiaries. And finally, you're paying the taxes. You got it done. And now you have to file. At the end of all this, you have to file for a request, basically, to end your executor responsibility. So you have to get a form then so that you can file for ending the executive designation. All these things. It is amazing. That takes a couple of years on an average. Believe it or not, yeah, I'm sure you believe it after you've just heard all this nonsense. So that is, in a nutshell, all the things that you need to do as an executor. Now, I am very happy to present a lot of this stuff to a group of potential executors, younger people who have to go through it. We're not prepared to be an executor, let's face it. It's just like we're not prepared to be parents either. They don't teach you all this stuff in school. You need to be prepared to be an executor, especially if you're an only child. You know you're going to have to do this. So I'm open to give this presentation to anyone. As a group, probably not as an individual, because, boy, I don't think I want to go running all over the place. But again, I mentioned that I'm giving this at the Shrewsbury Senior Center, August 10th. I think it's about 2:15 or so. And please show up. Be happy to give you handouts on this stuff, answer any questions that you may have. Good enough. This is Dr. C. Have a nice day.